Hi, good to see you.
Nice to have you with us. It's interesting. I'd never imagined, by the way, these stories would have got to the courts. I always sort of assumed they would be dealt with at a lower level, and that seems to be what this amendment, these watering down, as it's called, are suggesting. What's your response, firstly, to these changes? Does it affect significantly the right of what free speech campaigners are looking for?
I'm afraid it does. It does cause me great concern because we're not, I think, now in a position where we can really trust the institutions like the universities always to handle these cases as they should. So if you've got a case of someone like Kathleen Stock, for instance, who's been harassed and misrepresented for years,
yeah, and
there are legitimate questions to ask as to whether the university treated her, dealt with that case correctly. Similarly, in the University of Essex, someone was cancelled. Rosa Friedman, she was cancelled when she tried to give a speech. There were death threats about her. The department didn't reschedule her, and then later it was found that University Essex hadn't upheld her free speech rights. So I'm afraid we can't really trust the universities to get this right.
Right.
And that's why it's important that the power go beyond the university in the hands of a regulator, but really also in the hands of a court, which has the power to compel and the power to issue injunctions.
Yeah, I wondered whether the government was saying, look, the court time is precious these days. Anything we can keep out of a courtroom, the better. And generally speaking, as humans, that's what we'd all like to believe, right?
Yeah, of course. We'd like to keep things out of court if possible. And if this bill works as intended and works correctly, these things will be kept out of the court, because it's very easy for universities not to go to court. All they have to do is do what they're meant to do, which is uphold the free speech rights of the people who are there. It's up to them whether they want to spend time in court or not. But it's really important, because a right doesn't mean anything if it can't be properly enforced. Yeah. And it's for the courts, really, that have the power to enforce this right. And
there's no doubt there is an issue in this area. We talk about it often, and I know this is obviously, by definition of your areas of interest, etc., something you feel passionately about. But every now and again I speak to somebody and they say, "Oh yeah, there's no such thing as anybody being cancelled. That never really happened. It's almost like an urban myth." I mean, that's nonsense, right? I mean, this happens all the time.
Yeah, I think we should have got well past that stage. It's like people who deny the moon landings or something like that. We've got so much evidence. There are so many cases. I mean, Kathleen Stock is an obvious case. My own university, there was someone who gave a talk, and I had to hide students in a room because they were afraid of being seen to go into the room to hear that person speak. There have been gender-critical feminists who are being shamed and harassed simply because they describe their own experiences of sexual assault, for instance, as reasons for being concerned about possible changes to the law and so on. So it's absolutely happening everywhere. And you have to think the people who deny even that it's happening, but there are so many documented cases, you have to wonder what their motivations are. Of course, if you're not in a controversial field and you're not doing anything controversial or shocking, and you're doing something that's not going to raise emotions, you might not notice it. But that's kind of the point of the university, is to be a place where people can do that.
Yeah.
And it's the people who are doing that who are really feeling this at the moment, I think.
I mean, this is a rather root one question, but it still flummoxes me. Every now and again I have a flick around YouTube. I'll watch some of those speakers that have attended Cambridge or Oxford in some of those big sort of Q&A, speech Q&A kind of sessions. And when I see somebody on there that I know I intrinsically are going to disagree with, they're the ones I want to listen to most. I mean, it's great to hear a speaker that is going to echo every fibre and sinew of your ideology, whether it's politics, economics, whatever it happens to be. But when it's somebody that ordinarily you think, this is that person I don't rate very much, surely they're the ones you really want to listen to and hear.
Well, exactly. And that's why when you have a speaker who's cancelled, I don't want to lay too much emphasis on cancellation, but I will say that when you have a speaker who's cancelled, the person who bears the cost is often not the speaker, but it's the audience. Because when I invite a speaker to university, for instance, I want people to turn up who disagree with them so that they can have a debate. And it's the students who wanted to put their points and have a conversation with the speaker that they disagree with. That's the conversations you learn the most from. Those are the ones who've really suffered a loss when a controversial speaker is cancelled. Yeah,
and I think it was Christopher Hitchens that put it rather well, that, to endorse cancellation or removal, no platform, whatever you want to call it, is, you are essentially also chipping away at your own right to free speech, because somebody else may wish to do the very same thing to you. It's not hard to fathom.
Yeah, it's not hard to find. And actually, when you think about it, if we look at countries like China, for instance, or Russia, or any country where free speech is curtailed, if there are regulations as to what you can and can't say, who is the one who gets to decide when they're applied?
Yep.
Inevitably, it's the people with power. Who's going to suffer? Inevitably, it's the people who don't have the power. And actually, my experience has been, and I've heard from elsewhere as well, that it's the people who are most concerned about free speech, who are most concerned about cancel culture, actually, in the places where you don't find this, in universities, is where you have more sort of working class students. So you have students where it's an issue of people perhaps who are less privileged and who have less money. They perhaps care more about free speech. That's been the experience anecdotally that I've heard across the sector. Yeah,
I often wonder whether let's just use the word cancellation, whether cancellation is a kind of slightly a sort of middle-class rebellion of some kind. I don't know, you know, I'm funded by the bank of mum and dad. I had a very affluent, opulent upbringing, middle, upper class, etc. I need to rebel. I need to rebel somehow, and maybe this is one way of rebelling. Could it be as simple as that?
Well, I mean, one thing I would say is I don't really want to blame the students. So, I mean, students have always rebelled to some extent. There've always been various attempts at stopping speakers coming. What's really changed, I think, is the university authorities. They have to take most of the blame, because it used to be that students would make a protest about a speaker coming and the university authorities would say, fine, you know, you can have your protest, but the speaker will come and we will have free speech and we will have a discussion. And that seems to have changed because the incentives for university leaders have shifted. And one of the great things about this bill was supposed to be that it rebalanced the incentives for university leaders so that they had a stronger incentive, not just to be concerned about the welfare in some very broad sense of the students, but also about the basic free speech rights that are essential for a university to function in the first place.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because this would be ordinarily, I mean, if this was anywhere else, you know, the workplace where a speaker was coming, you might have a different view. But, you know, if this was a family fortunes question, we asked 100 people, where is the last place you would imagine somebody would be cancelled for giving a speech? Then the number one answer might well be universities. And yet here we are, but almost on a weekly basis, visiting this subject.
Yeah, and you have to ask yourself, what are universities for if you can't do it here? And when in your life and where in the country can you discuss these issues if they can't be discussed at university? And it's not just abstract theoretical questions. If it's questions about race, questions about the Gender Recognition Act, questions about Israel and Palestine, these are deeply important questions for all of us. And there has to be somewhere where you can have a discussion where you run the risk of offending people and shocking them and disturbing them. Because if you can't have a conversation where you risk offending people, you can't have a sincere conversation. And you can't really discuss what you actually think in a way that perhaps might lead you to change your mind, might lead the other person to change your mind. And in any case, both sides will learn something, and that's just what's not happening at the moment.
Yeah, shock horror, some people have different opinions, right?
Right.
Simple as that. Arif, thank you.